Hi, this is Mark Birch, and today I'm going to be taking a look at analysis and revision of Carol Ann Duffy's Death of a Teacher. Unsurprisingly, Duffy's Death of a Teacher does deal with a teacher's death, but more surprisingly, this isn't the central focus of the poem. The poetic voice uses the news of the teacher's death to reflect on the nature of learning and poetry as transformative. The teacher who has died was instrumental in initiating this appreciation, and so her death is not characterised by grief, despite Duffy's use of the elegaic form, but by optimism and a love of life. The poem's title's interesting in terms of Duffy's choice of the indefinite article. The use of a universalises the effect of a teacher's death. It seems that this poem is about the effects of teachers rather than the death of one specific teacher. The teacher is unnamed, and while her death is no doubt a personal loss, it's more significant as a vehicle for reflection. Duffy recognises how a teacher's life can transform those around them, and this teacher lives on in the poetic voice's love of language. The poem is composed of unrhymed couplets that may be reminiscent of the traditional poetic forms that the voice so admires. It creates a regularity that may mirror the poem's sense of life going on, providing hope for the future. The first two stanzas offer a framing narrative of the poetic voice observing trees outside and describing them through the conceit of gambling. This introduces the motif of trees that dominates the poem. Trees are transformed into many things. Here they're metaphorically transformed into gamblers, but later they're transformed more literally into desks and books. And this imagery could symbolise the transformation in the poetic voice, who's inspired by her teacher and begins a lifelong love of poetry and language. The big trees that open the poem are described with stark simplicity, as is the scratched old desk of the sixth stanza. The simplicity of the adjectives acts as a powerful contrast to the imaginative flourishes that metaphorically transform these objects. The power of language is conveyed. With the trees personified as poker players, their leaves are metaphorically cards, with Duffy using a series of verbs from the semantic field of poker to capture the movement of the leaves. The repeated use of present continuous verbs conveys the energy of the wind in the leaves, shuffling and dealing, turning, folding. The present continuous gives a sense of something that's ongoing, despite some leaves being lost, drifting down to the lawn, floating away. The lost leaves may symbolise the dead, in particular the dead teacher. This interpretation is supported by the description of the falling leaves being juxtaposed to the statement, "You died yesterday." Once again, Duffy conveys the idea that despite death having occurred, things go on. The energy of the wind in the leaves may represent the infused learning of those that have been taught, something that continues despite the death of a teacher. The death is presented as gentle through the verbs drifting and floating, as well as through the loss occurring on a breeze. And this is complemented by the alliteration of drifting down, which creates a sense of harmony through the repetition of the sound. Ace high continues the use of the semantic field of poker, with the image of an ace being similar to that of a leaf. Ace high is also a very low hand in poker, perhaps representing the lack of significance in an individual's death, or how ephemeral life is. The image of the leaf gently falling is structurally conveyed through the use of enjambment, with the prepositional phrase "on a breeze" drifting onto the next line of the poem. The gentle description of the falling leaf makes the shock of "you died yesterday" all the more potent. The words immediately follow "on a breeze" and are unadorned by sentiment. The lack of euphemism could suggest that there's no unpleasantness associated with this death, an unpleasantness that euphemism could be employed to hide. The direct address also makes this seem deeply personal, given that the poetic voice appears to speak to the dead teacher directly. "When I heard the hour" seems to introduce a fatalistic note. The hour would appear to figuratively refer to the time of death, and the poetic voice makes the association with home time, last bell, as if the end of the school day has been appropriately chosen for the end of the teacher's life. The link with the past initiates a reverie in which the poetic voice returns to her favourite lesson, English of course, when she was 13. The teacher is relaxed and informal, sitting on her desk and swinging her legs. The teacher is reading Yeats to the bored girls, who act as a contrast to the poetic voice whose heart stumbled and blushed. Duffy captures the awkwardness and embarrassment of first love through these verb choices. She's in love with the words, which clearly affect her profoundly. I saw the tree forms part of a compound sentence with fell in love with the words, implying that there's a connection between these two clauses. The reader may assume that the tree is one of those observed in the first line of the poem, creating another connection between the teacher, language, and imagery. However, the enjambments used to undermine this expectation, providing the revelation that the tree that's seen is one brought back to life through the power of the imagination. The poetic voice sees the tree that was felled in order to create the desk that she sits at. The tree has undergone a process of transformation, just as the girl has through listening to Yeats, and the big trees did through the power of language. Language and the imagination create connections and have transformative power, allowing the poetic voice to see the world in different ways. The desk is merely a scratched old desk, but the simplicity of this description is undermined by the miraculous transformation that the poetic voice recognises in it having morphed into a desk. This awe of transformation leads to a blurring of boundaries in the description that follows. The bird that she hears in the oak could be an imagined bird call from the desk's past, or an actual bird in the present. Either way, it's transformed through the metaphor used to describe it scribble itself on the air. Duffy's use of a verb from the semantic field of writing and school to describe the erratic sounds of bird call displays the capacity for language to transform and offer new insights, mirroring the joy of language experienced by the poetic voice. This blurring of the boundaries between past and present reinforces the sense of awe evident in "we were truly there." This magical quality is captured by the way in which Duffy's use of enjambment helps to stress the pun on the word present. The stanza enjambment makes the word present seem tautological, simply reinforcing the sense of being there, until Duffy juxtaposes the word miss, transforming the word into the direct speech of a child registering her attendance in class, again blurring the boundaries between past and present. The smoke that braided itself with lines from Keats is another of these blurrings. The smoke from the teacher's cigarette becomes bound, in the poetic voice's imagination, with the lines of Keats's poetry. The two are braided together through association. Like the leaves as cards in the opening stanzas, the smoke and the writing of Keats share similarities in terms of the imagery, with their black swirling forms. Duffy's figurative writing captures the power of language to transform and make unexpected connections that the poetic voice so admires. Duffy's choice of Yeats and Keats as the specific poets mentioned may be significant. They both use traditional forms and are part of the canon of great literature. Yeats, as a symbolist, employed language in a way that Duffy mirrors in her use of natural imagery. Keats, as part of the Romantic movement, explored the emotional landscape in a way that's entirely consistent with Death of a Teacher. The sense of the teacher's legacy living on is captured by the clause, "Teaching is endless love." Love of various subjects can be developed through being taught, and this sense of love is represented by the pun, "by heart." Just as in Duffy's poem The Good Teachers, where she described learning Rudyard Kipling by heart, the phrase functions on two levels. Firstly, to learn a poem word for word, and secondly, given the symbolic associations of heart, to love the poem. The recitation of poetry and the magical effects of the words are conveyed by Duffy's metaphor of them as spells, again something associated with transformation. The strong alliteration of "l" that follows in "the lists lovely on the learning tongue" phonologically capture the sensory quality of language. The poem ends by returning to the gambling trees, providing a cyclical structure, favoured by Yeats, and a sense of continuity. The end of the day is described as gold, with clear connotations of precious, and the light burns, suggesting passion. This description presents an optimism for life rather than a despair as a result of death. It's an interesting comparison to Yeats's description of the end of the day in Adam's Curse. "We saw the last embers of daylight die." Finally, the dwindling light is metaphorically compared to the edge of a page of a book. It's a thin light, but one that inspires excitement for the future. It's waiting to be turned. The excitement and love of life is represented once again through the semantic field of school or learning, and suggests that this optimism and joy is a result of the learning inspired by the now dead teacher. Okay, ta.